work part-time security at an outpatient facility. On average, I work at the hospital about 6 times a month. The money I make here is the money that I spend on myself, which is the only reason I have this job in the first place. I can go weeks without anything happening, then have a night where I'm constantly having something going on. Some of this can be rationalized. Other things, not so much. I have to do bi-hourly checks in a 12-hour shift. This requires me to walk around the facility, make sure that doors are locked, even though I already locked them, and basically document anything that may happen. On the human, physical level, this is very rare. Hospitals in general of any kind will always kind of come with their share of despair in some capacity. I've worked here for maybe 6 to 7 months, and I don't have an incredible amount of knowledge of the law, so to speak. Most nights I'm in the hospital with 2 nurses and a maximum of about 3 patients. These are usually the uneventful nights. Then at least once every 2 months or so, I'll be in a position where I have to guard the facility by myself. There are 2 stories I'm aware of. One is about a patient who passed away unexpectedly at the end of one of the corridors. I constantly have to open that door because it keeps closing. I'll open it, and when I go to do my checks, it'll be closed. I put this to the test one night by opening it, walking a circle around the corridor, and then went back to the room to find it closed. One of the older nurses had a son that, ironically enough, passed away in the hospital after a surgery. That's a sad occurrence as it is, but before she quit, she said that she could sense her son's presence in the room that he passed away in. I assumed this was a coping mechanism on her part, but in that room I can occasionally see a shadow moving from one corner to the other. These were the things you can possibly talk me into rationalizing to some degree. The next 3 things will have to be persuaded a bit harder. First, the thing that got me looking over my shoulder for a while was when I went into the break room to make a pot of coffee. My back was against the open room, and as I'm fumbling around for cream and sugar, I can hear what sounds like furniture being dragged across the tile floor. I turned around and expected to get no closure over what I heard, but I had the pleasure of seeing a chair move a good 1.5 feet by itself. I got out of there and went back to my post. Didn't bother with the coffee, didn't know what else to do. The second thing was in the form of an apparition. I've never seen one before, and it bothered me for days. I was conducting my checks of the facility when I found my way down the same corridor that I mentioned earlier in this post. I was checking a few of the rooms when I turned and saw a white shrouded figure standing in the doorway about 5 feet from me. I dropped my keys and flashlight on the ground and sort of tripped into the adjacent room. I was still processing what it was, but when I looked back, the doorway was empty, and upon further observation, there wasn't anybody in the hallway, which I already knew, but still needed to confirm. I further inspected the room and also did a recheck of the facility just for my own reassurance. Nothing. I was the only one there. The last thing is hands down what scared me the most. There is a storage room in the middle of the hospital. I hate this room for a variety of reasons. The main one being whoever designed the plans for this building stuck a light switch in the dead center of the room, and when I have to turn it off, I have to navigate my way out in the dark. This room gets pitch black once the lights are off. One night, I went into the room to make sure the back door was locked, and when I shut the lights to lock the room down for the night, in my ear, clear as day, I hear, "Shh," like I could feel the presence of someone behind me. My ears responded as if somebody was right in my ear, saying it at a forced loud whisper. Don't know if that makes sense, but it's the only way I can describe it. I made sure I was out in the hallway before I shined my light in the room. Nothing again. I would later put a small figure of the Virgin Mary in the room underneath one of the shelves. Since then, I haven't had any experiences in that room. Nancy had worked in mental health group homes and facilities for over 30 years. She had seen it all, and not much frightened her. Preferring night shifts due to a lifelong struggle with insomnia, she figured that if she wasn't going to get any sleep at night anyway, she might as well be working. The pay wasn't great, but it paid her bills, and she enjoyed the connections that she made with her co-workers and residents over the years. When the night shift opening at Everlove Behavioural Health Group Home was posted 6 weeks ago, she immediately applied and got the job. As she lay on the living room couch in the darkened front room, she listened to the sounds that penetrated the quiet. The ticking of the clock that hung next to the television sounded loud in her ears. A car would drive by every so often, lighting the room briefly with its headlights. Besides the low hum of the refrigerator, there were few other sounds. But what is that shuffling noise? It was familiar as she had heard it every night of the last month she had worked at Everlove. The first few times she heard the shuffling noise, she just assumed residents also struggled to sleep at night and were pacing around in their rooms. She never looked for the source because it didn't occur to her that the noise didn't belong. Long hours awake at night meant that she often heard strange sounds that were simply masked by the relatively louder daytime noises. But this time, she was more aware of the sound. This time felt different. That is when she realized she could also hear quiet murmuring. She strained to hear the words, but it was far too quiet. Slowly walking into the hallway, the sound became more distinct, and she could tell it was coming from Stan's room. Stan suffered from schizophrenia and frequently had auditory and visual hallucinations. Hesitating at the door, she wondered if she should knock and check on him or just let it pass. She was just about to turn back to the couch when Stan began yelling, "I won't do it! You can't make me!" Nancy knocked on the door, announcing that she was coming in to check on him and not to be alarmed. The only response was murmuring and sobbing, so she slowly opened the door. Stan was lying in the fetal position in bed, repeating the same line over and over, "I won't do it." Stan was clearly distressed, and Nancy asked if he would like his as needed prescription sedative. At first, he declined, but after a few minutes of soothing talk, he accepted the pill and fell back to sleep. Back to the couch in the darkened living room she went, back to the ticking clock, the humming refrigerator, and the occasional passing car. The shuffling noise had stopped, and Nancy had all but forgotten about the previous incident with Stan, when again she heard him yell. This time, it was not words, but a guttural scream. Afraid that his outburst would wake the whole house and cause even more trouble for her, she ran to his room and threw open the door without knocking. Stan was no longer in bed. He was standing straight up with a look of pure horror on his face and a bedside lamp clutched in his hand. Nancy was no fool, and she knew better than to try to restrain him. She calmly asked Stan what was bothering him and offered to help in any way that she could. Stan just stood there gripping the lamp and staring directly at something invisible to Nancy. Several minutes of cajoling worked, and she managed to get him to release the lamp and get into bed. Stan's demeanour changed. The electric energy he had been exuding had relaxed into tearful exhaustion. He begged her to check his room before she left. He wouldn't tell her what to look for. It was just something that shouldn't be there. After checking every square inch of the room, he sighed and fell asleep once more. Nancy left the room amazed that Stan had that reaction, considering the highly potent sedative he had taken just an hour prior. Her watch said 4 in the morning, 3 more hours until her day shift relief person would arrive. Hopefully all would be peaceful until then. By 5 in the morning, the winter sky was still dark and residents were all still in their rooms. That's when Nancy heard the strangest sound yet. She strained her ears once more to try and figure out what it was. At first she heard the familiar shuffling. That was followed by some quiet groans and heavy breathing. After a few minutes, she heard what sounded like dripping. What could possibly be dripping? Nancy checked every sink and shower. No faucets were dripping. Where was it coming from? That's when she turned the bend from one of the bathrooms to the hallway with Stan's bedroom. The dripping noise was definitely coming from that room. Had it been daytime, there is no way she would have heard it. However, the night shift was quiet, and each drop left a distinctive sound as it hit the hard wood floor. Quietly, Nancy knocked on Stan's door. No answer. She then whispered, "Stan, are you up? Do you need some help with something?" No answer. She wrestled in her head whether or not to open the door. If he was asleep, she didn't want to wake him. He was so distressed earlier. He needed the sleep, and she didn't want the other residents to be disturbed. After some back and forth, she decided to let him be until med-call at 7. The sun slowly rose and light began to fill the group home through the large living room window. Nancy's relief worker would be here soon. She just needed to dole out each resident's morning medications. She realized with a start that she could still hear the dripping sound. She must have tuned it out the past couple of hours. Maybe she did fall asleep on the couch after all. Curious, she walked back to Stan's room. Yes, the dripping was not her imagination. As far as she knew, the only liquid in the room was a small glass of water on the nightstand from when he took his pill the night before. But that small of an amount would certainly not still be dripping if it spilled 2 hours before. She quietly knocked and whispered to Stan again through the door, but there was no answer. As silently as she could, Nancy opened the door a crack to peek inside. Stan was not in bed. She opened the door all the way. Stan was not to be found. There was only one place to hide in this room: the closet. Summoning all her courage, Nancy slowly walked over to the closet and gripped the doorknob. The dripping could be heard even louder. She very slowly opened the door, revealing Stan sitting in darkness inside. As she turned on the closet light, the full horror of what she was seeing hit her. Blood rivulets were dripping from Stan's gouged eyes and ears. The droplets made a very distinctive sound as they hit the wooden floor. He was gripping a bloody pencil and smiling. Sensing her presence, he said, "I finally got them to stop. I finally got them to leave me alone," with fresh and drying blood covering his face and clothing. Nancy was just about to help him out of the closet when she stopped and froze in fear. Not because of the terrible sight in front of her, but the unmistakable sound of shuffling right behind her. I work at a 24-hour gas station. Honestly, I am not even sure why we're open all the time. The gas station sits right off a hardly busy road. The only average visitors are truckers, locals in need of milk at midnight for some fucking reason, and people visiting that lose their way or have car troubles. I know. I shouldn't be the one complaining about some poor bastard who has to ask for help in a creepy gas station, but after a while, it just becomes troublesome. Somehow, everyone loses their way on that road, and somehow they always seem to run out of gas just in time to darken my doorstep. If you haven't guessed by now, I work the night shift, which means I get to deal with all of the creatures that go bump in the night. When I first started working, Strange things only happened every now and then. Someone would walk in completely drenched from head to toe, but talking and acting like nothing was wrong. The first few times I pointed it out, even asked them if they needed help or a place to warm up, but that was a mistake. They would just stare blankly at me, almost like a character on a TV show when the camera leaves the room. After making eye contact with me, they would continue as if nothing happened, like I never said anything. Eventually, I realized that it's pointless to try and address any strangeness that occurs at night in the small building. It became more of an inconvenience than anything. I'd ask them what was going on, they'd stare at me lifelessly, then we'd continue on. After a few weeks, I got really good at not caring what the fuck came into the station. Honestly, it was more shocking when someone acting perfectly normal came in. The longer I spent working there, the less said people occurred. Suddenly, my nights were filled with stranger and stranger people. Someone doused in kerosene, coming in to buy a pack of Marlboro Lights, a person missing half their arm whose blood miraculously disappeared upon their leaving. Hell, sometimes the things that entered didn't even seem human. They looked perfectly normal, but with small imperfections. Almost as though they were piecing together how to look human but couldn't get it quite right. Thumbs facing the wrong way, the whites of their eyes, a greenish hue instead of white. Too many or far too few teeth, same thing with fingers. Despite their unnerving and uncanny appearance, they behaved just like the others, acting as though everything was the most average thing in the world. It was just longer after that when things started to take a toll on me. Suddenly, the things or people, if you could call them that, seemed violent. Not towards me, of course. Weirdly enough, it seemed like nothing that entered ever even disliked me. They actually seemed to be friendly. It was when the more humanish ones started coming covered in blood, buying only a pack of gum and leaving, that I became nervous. At some points, I couldn't even recognize if they were a human or something else, and that scared me more than anything. Recently, the things visiting the shop have hardly even been human-looking. Creatures with no faces will enter and just stare at the drinks, then leave without a word. Shadows void of any features will stop by and wait for another customer to enter before following them out. Sometimes I could swear I saw honest-to-God ghosts, or ghouls, or whatever the hell you want to call them. Disfigured and thin monsters would scamper in on all fours, just patiently sitting at the register until I offered them something even as small as a stick of gum. The worst of it was last night, and it's shaken me so much that I am considering calling in sick for the rest of the week. After my usual cycle of various creatures making their rounds, something changed. Everything seemed dimmer, colder. The air was thick with the smell of rain and wind. Then it entered. So tall it almost had to crouch inside the building. Shadowy and ashen. It spoke to me unlike all the others. It was real. It wasn't pretending everything is normal. It knew me, and it knew I knew it. I was considering fleeing. This presence wasn't as common to me, and I felt completely out of control of whatever was happening. It must have noticed because it opened its mouth, inky black tar in the shape of teeth dripping down. There is lots to come, but you will be safe. Worry not about what happens outside. We care for you. As it started to leave, crouching down to fit through the door, its raspy voice echoed back. Count the crows. Open your doors to us, but do not follow us out of them. What the fuck do I do? Ever since that night, I've been having such vivid nightmares. When I fall asleep, I am suddenly back at work, yet I wake up in my bed. Everywhere I go, I see crows. Am I just noticing them more now? Are they hurting people? Do I have a moral obligation to step in? Could I just sit back while these creatures terrorize others? While I just sit in the safety of the gas station? Do I go back to work? I've never even met the owners. I have no one to ask or talk to about this.